Hi everyone and welcome back to Stellar HFY. First off, thank you. Seriously, the response to our last few battles, betrayals, and first contacts has been incredible. And today, we're stepping into a story the Galactic Council wished had never been recorded. So strap in because this one's not just about fleets and fire. It's about what happens when a species that's been underestimated for centuries decides to answer the galaxy's call on their terms. They say the council votes are all theater. I can't argue with that. 847 in favor, 3 against. You could have written the result before the chamber even opened. The Sol system was going to be annexed. Everyone knew it. The council chambers still went through the motions. Long speeches, procedural objections, a few dramatic pauses for the press drones. But the outcome was fixed from the start. The humans, they were supposed to be easy, primitive, loud. The kind of species that could barely agree on how to divide a continent, let alone mount a coordinated defense. We'd been listening to their radio transmissions for decades, and all we heard was a fractured world shouting over itself. No unified government, no deep space fleet, no danger. The only real opposition came from the Vorthak delegation, and that wasn't new. They'd been raising warnings for years about us moving too fast, stretching too far, not doing enough reconnaissance. People call it caution fatigue. You hear someone yell, "Wolf," long enough, you stop looking up from your data pad. So the vote went through, the mission was approved, and my fleet was chosen for the operation. 8 ships, all outfitted for standard annexation protocol. Orbital platforms for resource control, atmospheric processors for habitat adjustment, detention modules for whoever decided to be difficult. 43 times before, this setup had worked without a hitch. I'd done this before. That was the dangerous part. I was confident enough to believe the mission profiles, the intercepted human broadcasts, the Council's assessment that Sol was just another system on the list. We jumped into the outer system like we'd done 100 times before. Everything looked routine. Traffic readings, matched projections, long-range sweeps found nothing worth worrying about. Then the scan hit low orbit. At first it looked like clutter. A scattering of returns around their planet, big enough to register, irregular enough to dismiss as debris, old satellites, maybe wreckage from some forgotten conflict. We'd seen worse messes before. But there was something wrong. The cluster wasn't random. You see enough orbits, you get an eye for them. Debris clouds wander, decay, drift into new paths. This didn't. These pieces formed a loose ring, not tight but deliberate, arranged. Probably just old junk, one of my officers said. Humans aren't known for orbital housekeeping. I stared at the display for a long time. Then why is it symmetrical? No one had an answer. We logged it as non-threatening. It didn't match any known defense configuration, and the mission parameters didn't require investigation. We had landing points to map, deployment timetables to keep. Still, I kept looking at it. I never wrote this in any formal log, but in my private notes I wrote one line. It looks more like a perimeter marker. We moved on. 8 ships in formation, decelerating toward a world that thought we were still weeks away. All standard, all safe. That was the last time I thought this mission was going to go according to plan. First contact never starts with silence. That's the thing I kept circling in my head as the minutes dragged. When a council fleet enters a system, there's always noise. Sometimes it's anger, threats, ultimatums. Sometimes it's desperation, begging, bargaining. Sometimes it's just confusion, half the planet shouting at once. You broadcast council authority codes and you get something back. Always. Sol gave us nothing. The first hail went out, crisp and formal. Silence. We checked transmission relays, verified carrier frequency. Clean. The second hail was the annexation greeting, a formality as old as the Council's expansion itself. This one had a tone baked in that said the decision was made, the outcome inevitable. Still nothing. The bridge felt different. Not alarmed, yet, but quiet in the wrong way. First contact teams are used to chatter filling the air. The lack of it leaves too much space for thought. That was when they appeared. They didn't approach. That's what no one understands when they look back on it. There was no warning on our sensors, No spike in drive emissions. No faint heat signatures in the dark. 1 second the void ahead was clean. The next there were ships in it. Not one. A formation. The bridge's sensor officer swore. The tactical displays struggled to draw their outlines. Silhouettes kept twitching, size readouts adjusting by the second. The hulls were dark, patterned in a way that absorbed more light than they reflected. No hull registry. No IFF tags. Not even a fleet insignia. Just a single emblem on each vessel. 3 overlapping white circles. Simple and stark. And they moved wrong. Council ships glide. That's the nature of our drives, our designs, our physics. Every maneuver is graceful, an arc plotted by the numbers. But these ships darted, halted, rotated in ways that made no sense. They pivoted without drift, accelerated in bursts that defied expected mass profiles. It wasn't random. There was intention to it, the kind that makes a gunnery officer's targeting computer hesitate for a fraction of a second. We did what the book told us. Authority codes again, no response. That was when the first strike hit. It wasn't an explosion, no weapons fire, no visible damage at all. Just a blink on the flagship's status panel. Communications array offline. Not damaged, not destroyed, just disabled. Navigation, green. Life support, green. Weapons, still online. Every system functional except the one that let us speak. That wasn't aggression. That was a statement. I've seen hostile acts. This wasn't one. This was someone tapping the side of your ship with a finger and saying, we could do more if we wanted. The bridge crew were waiting for my order. I didn't give it right away. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I needed to see if this was their opening move or just their introduction. The answer came a second later. The channels filled, not with their voices, with ours. At first it was harmless. Background files, crew rosters, officer service histories. It took about 3 seconds for harmless to turn dangerous. They had things no human should have. Mission files sealed to senior command. Performance evaluations marked confidential. Family records stored in council security archives, the kind that didn't leave homeworld servers. Then the voices started. Not human voices. Ours, recorded in secure facilities, weeks old, played back with perfect clarity. Private conversations, command discussions, personal admissions. One of my captains went pale when his own voice came over the comms, discussing a failed operation we'd classified at level red. His ship stopped acknowledging orders altogether. Another captain, older, steadier, snapped his restraints and had to be pulled from his command chair when the humans played a conversation between him and his partner back home. The kind of conversation you only have when you think no one can hear. The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was full of everything the humans had just put into the air. I ordered the fleet into defensive posture, standard protocol, unknown contacts, unknown capabilities. You buy yourself space to react. But even as I gave the order, I could feel the shape of the formation changing. Not physically, the ships were still in their grid, but in the way the crews moved. The confidence we jumped in with was gone. You can feel it in the way responses come back slower, in the way status checks get repeated twice, in the way no one wants to be the first to break formation. On my own bridge, my first officer kept glancing at the comms readout like it might start bleeding. The comms chief hadn't looked away from her console in minutes, knuckles white around the input frame. And all the while, the human ships just waited. No firing solution. No demand for surrender. No movement toward or away. They were in no hurry at all. That was the part I kept coming back to, even as I gave orders. They weren't reacting to us. They weren't improvising. This was a plan they'd set in motion long before we arrived. And somewhere, under the procedures, under the orders, I had a thought I couldn't shake. They didn't just show up today. They've been here the whole time. Reinforcements are the comfort, blanket of the Council Navy. They're the promise every officer makes to themselves when the situation turns unpredictable. Hold position, call for backup. The fleets will come. So we called. The response was immediate. Multiple battle groups redirected, schedules adjusted. Everything looked like the familiar rhythm, just on a larger scale. The humans had made an audacious move, but the weight of the council was about to drop on them. I told my officers the same thing I told them in past operations. Hold, defend, let the reinforcements stabilize the field. Then the first report came in from the rally point at the system's edge. It wasn't a distress signal. Not exactly. It was a fragment, half a sentence, a rising pitch of panic in the voice, and then static. Our comms chief cycled through channels trying to reacquire, but the signal was gone. We wrote it off as an isolated engagement. Space is full of hazards, and the humans had clearly fielded more ships than intelligence projected. That was all. One group hit an ambush. Unfortunate, but not catastrophic. Then the second report came in. Different fleet, different sector. Same result. Another battle group jumped to its rally coordinates and disappeared off the board. It stopped feeling like coincidence. Over the next hour, reports began arriving like shards of glass. They came from multiple sectors, 50 light years in every direction. They weren't just reinforcing us. They were meant to counter the humans anywhere they appeared along the frontier. And everywhere they appeared, the pattern repeated. Ambushes, precise, devastating, not random skirmishes, not opportunistic strikes. These were engagements planned in advance, coordinated to occur almost simultaneously across multiple regions of council space. The timings were too tight, the targeting too clean. They weren't reacting to us. They were orchestrating us. At first, the bridge tried to make sense of it as an intelligence breach. Maybe a leak in one of the reinforcement fleets. Maybe a rogue officer. But that didn't explain the scale. This wasn't one fleet's maneuver schedule. It was all of them. Every movement, every fallback, every secure rally point. And then came the core. One of the human ships in our perimeter took heavy damage during a feint. We managed to recover a data core from the wreckage, burned on one side but still sealed. We thought maybe we'd finally get a piece of their tech. What we found was worse. It wasn't technology. It was broadcast scripts, human transmissions, thousands of hours of them. The very ones we'd been monitoring for decades, and layered through them like a skeleton were production notes, adjusted frequencies, timed events, entire narratives crafted to look like organic chaos. The humans hadn't been sending random radio noise into space. They'd been feeding us a story. The whole fractured planet image, the warring nations, the primitive space program. It wasn't reality, it was theater. I stood at the console for a long time, staring at the metadata. Whole decades of effort had gone into crafting the picture we believed. And then it hit me. We hadn't been observing them. They had been curating what we saw. They had chosen what we would know and what we would think. One of my junior officers made a noise behind me, a kind of dry laugh. "We weren't the explorers," he said. "We were the test subjects." That line stuck with me, and as if the universe wanted to prove him right, the second half of the data core decrypted. It wasn't just misinformation, it was infiltration. Files with genetic profiles, modified sequences, matching records of council citizens. The humans hadn't stayed in Seoul. They'd come here, not as tourists, not as traders, as us. Genetic mimicry. They'd been walking our halls for decades, wearing our faces, speaking in our voices. One file showed an attendance roster for a classified military planning session from 3 cycles ago. I remembered the session. I remembered the arguments, the compromises, the eventual decisions about fleet allocation. And there, in the recovered records, were 2 delegates who didn't exist in any council personnel database. They hadn't just guessed our responses. They sat in the room when we decided them. I felt my throat tighten. I thought back over the last months, how every step of this operation had gone exactly as predicted. Not predicted by us. We hadn't been in control since before we jumped into this system. The bridge had gone quiet again. Not the routine quiet of ships on station. A tense quiet. Officers processing the same conclusion at the same time. I tried to focus on the tactical picture, but the truth was already there, reflected in the hollow expressions around me. The humans hadn't sprung the trap here at Seoul. The trap had been closed long before we arrived. You don't expect precision from a species you've been told is chaotic. Every council intelligence file we had on humanity described them the same way. Unpredictable, disorganized, prone to impulsive action. The kind of species that charges a fortified position without a plan, burns resources in the wrong place, wins by accident. That was the story we'd been fed, and we believed it. What I saw at Seoul was the opposite. The humans didn't fight like they were trying to destroy us. They fought like they were trying to rewrite the board without breaking any pieces they didn't need to. The first real strikes weren't on our ships. They went for the platforms. The Council's defense platforms were supposed to be impregnable. Shield arrays reinforced by overlapping harmonics. Layered defensive grids with redundant systems. You don't take them out in seconds. You wear them down over hours, unless you know the exact frequency the shields are tuned to. I watched the first platform's status display go from green to black in less than a second. No massive explosion. No visible strike. Just a pulse. A single spike at exactly the right resonance, and the shield folded like paper. A second pulse gutted the weapons array. Then the humans moved on. The second platform went down the same way, and the third. It didn't take long for the pattern to become obvious. They weren't just hitting defenses at random. They were tuned perfectly to our systems. That's not something you learn on the fly. That's years of study, long-term research into our technology, testing, calibration. That was the moment I understood how far back this went. The humans had been preparing for this campaign long before we'd even voted to annex their system. But the weapons were just the opening act. The real strike came over the comms. At first, I thought it was more of the personal data warfare. Crew records, classified logs. But this was different. These were council archives, operations data, war logs. The kind you bury so deep that only senior command ever knows they exist. And they weren't being broadcast to us alone. They were being broadcast to everyone. The 43 annexations before Seoul, the ones the Council had declared peaceful integrations, were played out in raw, unfiltered detail. Human voices introduced each one, naming the species, the world, the year of integration. Then came the footage. Ground combat from angles we'd never seen, detention camps, resource seizures, entire populations displaced, starved, or erased. And it wasn't just images. Survivors spoke, representatives of species we'd told the galaxy were thriving under Council stewardship. One by one, they described what really happened. The people who didn't survive, the cultures that didn't make it, they didn't accuse. That's what made it worse. They didn't shout or rage. They just told their stories. Calm, detailed, measured. My bridge crew listened, not because I told them to, not because they wanted to, because the humans didn't jam our channels to force these transmissions through. They cleared them. Our own systems prioritized the incoming feed, overriding standard communications. I watch my officers' eyes. You can tell when a crew is starting to slip from you, not in mutiny, but in belief. Belief in the mission, belief in the Council. It wasn't sudden, it was erosion. One officer at a time began hesitating before repeating orders. A tactical chief delayed executing a maneuver to keep a comm channel open just a little longer. I didn't need a mutiny to know the ship wasn't entirely mine anymore. And then came the moment I'll never forget. We picked up an open channel from one of our destroyers. It wasn't a distress call. It wasn't combat chatter. It was a surrender. Not to me, to the humans. No fighting, no threats. Just a quiet exchange. The humans acknowledged. The destroyer powered down its weapons and drifted. The rest of the fleet saw it. And once one ship broke formation, the others started thinking about it. It didn't matter how tight my orders were. I could keep the formation physically together, but I couldn't stop the cracks from spreading in real time. This wasn't a tactical defeat. This was something deeper. The Council's strength wasn't just its fleets. It was the perception that the fleets were right, that we were the stabilizing force in the galaxy. And in one campaign, the humans pulled that out from under us. The broadcast didn't stop at the past. They turned to the present, our own fleet's conduct at Seoul. Open channels carried audio from bridge to bridge, showing every moment of hesitation, every order questioned, every decision that exposed the cracks. It wasn't just humiliation, it was a demonstration. They weren't fighting to destroy our ships. They were fighting to destroy our credibility, and it was working. By the time the second wave of human strikes began, the Council's military credibility wasn't dying in combat. It was evaporating in full view of the galaxy. You can't lead a fleet if the fleet no longer believes the war is worth fighting. The humans never asked for surrender. Not directly. They didn't have to. They just let us see the kind of precision they had, the information they knew, the resources they'd prepared. Every captain knew the same thing I did. They could end us at any moment, and they weren't doing it. Not because they couldn't, but because they didn't need to. And the unspoken question began to form on every bridge. If they don't even need to destroy us, why are we dying for a council that lied to us? When the next round of transmissions began, statements from integrated worlds thanking humanity for intervention, the last of the resistance in my crews broke. They weren't just losing faith in the battle. They were losing faith in the council itself. It's one thing to lose a fight. It's another to realize the war you've been fighting might never have been the righteous mission you were told. That was the moment I knew the council's legitimacy wasn't being chipped away. It was gone. And all the humans had done was hold up a mirror and let us see ourselves in it. If you'd asked me, before Seoul, what the death of the council would look like, I'd have told you fire, planets burning under kinetic strikes, entire sectors in blackout, war fleets tearing each other apart at choke points. That's what we all imagined, because that's how power had shifted every other time in galactic history. The humans didn't do that. When the council finally broke, there was no grand battle, no capital world reduced to rubble, no surrender signed in a ruined chamber. It ended with silence. One by one, the fleet stopped answering council orders. The humans didn't chase them down. They didn't seize the ships or scrap them. They just stripped them. Drive cores were throttled, weapons arrays locked, munitions dismantled. Crew were discharged, not forcibly, but with their pay guaranteed until the end of their contracts. Ships that had been the pride of the Council Navy drifted home under reduced power, not as captured trophies, but as husks, too toothless to fight, too expensive to rebuild, and then the planets. We were ready for an occupation. That's what made sense. The humans had won. They'd take control, impose their rule, secure resources. Every scenario in my head played out that way. It never happened. They didn't annex anything. There were no human governors stepping into council offices. No planetary populations forced to swear allegiance to Seoul. Instead, the humans moved in with an efficiency that was terrifying, precisely because it was so light. They sent representatives to every major council world, but not to rule. They came to replace. In place of the council-appointed governors, new provisional governments were declared. Not human governments. Governments made up of local species, many of them from integrated worlds we'd claimed as loyal council members. Some of these worlds had been under our control for centuries. Their representatives were people I'd never seen in any official capacity, suddenly speaking with authority and legitimacy. And the humans supported them. Not with fleets in orbit, but with the kind of backing you can't argue with. Security monitoring stations were established at key points, not massive garrisons, just small, efficient outposts manned by human destroyers and reconnaissance craft. Enough to keep the peace, not enough to look like an occupying force. It was a statement in itself. We don't need to occupy you to control the situation. Council law dissolved overnight. No more directives from the chambers. No more quotas. No more enforcement decrees. The committees were disbanded without ceremony. Whole departments closed their doors, but they didn't burn the machinery down. Civilian infrastructure stayed running. Local administrations still processed trade, maintained systems, kept economies functioning. Only the central spine of the council, the part that held power, was removed. I saw the same pattern on every world we still had access to. The humans dismantled the structure that let the council exert control, but they left the skeleton in place. They didn't want to build something new over it. They wanted it to stand on its own. The message was clear. The council wasn't necessary. I didn't understand it at first. You fight a war, you win it, you consolidate power. That's how it's always been done. But the humans didn't treat this like a war. The first time I realized that was when I intercepted a human logistics transmission. It wasn't encrypted, just flag low priority. A fleet quartermaster was summarizing the Seoul campaign and its outcomes. They referred to it as a local security operation, not a war, not a strategic victory, an operation, something peripheral. I can still remember how that felt. Everything I had lived through, everything I had lost, all of it, just a box ticked on someone else's agenda. We thought we'd been fighting for the fate of the council. The humans saw it as maintenance. I watched provisional governments take root where council power used to be. I saw the old banners pulled down. I saw worlds that had lived under our laws for centuries act like nothing of value had been lost. There were no riots, no uprisings, just a quiet, almost relieved shift away from the council. And the humans let it happen. That's what made it worse. They didn't need to hold these worlds. They didn't need to keep their fleets here. They just needed to make sure that the power vacuum the council left behind didn't collapse into chaos. They didn't even take credit for stabilizing the situation. Every provisional government was given the appearance of autonomy, but every one of them also received human advisors, not soldiers, not governors, advisors. The kind of people who never appear on official rosters, but whose recommendations always seem to become policy. And while all this was happening, the council as an institution was vanishing. The military was gone, not defeated, but dismantled. The political authority was gone, not toppled, but emptied. The council worlds were functioning without the council. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt something closer to insignificance. Because in all the human transmissions we intercepted, in every communication between their fleets and their governments, Seoul was never the focus. It was a footnote, an after-action entry, a completed local security operation. The kind of phrasing you use when you finished a task that was never the main priority. That was the final humiliation. The council hadn't been brought down in a war. It hadn't been conquered. It had been reorganized, cleanly, efficiently, like the humans were tidying up their own backyard before moving on to something more important. And they were already moving on. I heard Kathera's assessment in the weeks that followed. She put it in the kind of measured language that makes people think they still have a place in the new order. But the truth was there for anyone willing to read between the lines. Humanity's campaign against the council had used a fraction of their available resources. It hadn't stretched them. It hadn't even delayed them. And their primary objectives lay elsewhere. That was the final thing I learned at Seoul. We weren't the center of the map. We were just a box to be checked before they moved on to whatever came next. By the time Kathera delivered her final assessment, the council didn't exist in any functional form. The fleets were gone, the committees dissolved, the authority we had wielded for centuries, nothing more than archived minutes and dusty seals locked in buildings. No one had the courage to enter anymore. Her report wasn't an indictment. It wasn't even a post-mortem. It read like a ledger being balanced at the end of a fiscal cycle. The tone was clinical, detached. Humanity's campaign against the council, she said, had required a fraction of their resources. The phrasing stayed with me, a fraction. They hadn't just won easily. They hadn't committed anywhere near their full capacity. The fleets we'd fought, the precision operations that dismantled us, they weren't the spearhead of a war machine at full output. They were a working group. And that realization bled into everything else she noted. The Seoul campaign was never their priority. In the intercepted transmissions from human fleets, in the offhand communications between their command and their logistics, Kithure had found references that kept repeating. Primary objectives, deep exploration, core concerns. Seoul and everything that had happened here was an operation conducted in a minor theater. That was the phrase that lodged itself in my mind and refused to leave. A minor theater. We'd thought we were fighting the battle that would define the balance of power in the galaxy for centuries. To them, it was an exercise, a necessary adjustment, one front among many. And that was what chilled me most. Not the weapons, not the precision, not the fact that they had taken apart the council without needing to occupy a single capital world. It was the implication that all of this, the destruction of our fleets, the dismantling of our authority, was peripheral. I gave my final testimony under the shadow of that knowledge. I remembered the first time I'd seen their ships at Seoul, the way they had moved wrong in ways I couldn't quantify, the way they had appeared where they shouldn't have been, the way their actions had felt rehearsed because, in hindsight, they were rehearsed. The Council had always believed it was the gravitational center of the galaxy. Our laws, our fleets, our diplomacy, everything was built on the assumption that every significant event orbited us. But the humans hadn't acted like they were fighting the center of anything. They'd treated us like a checkpoint, something to get through before they could move on to what actually mattered to them. Kithara ended her analysis with a warning. Humanity's restraint, she said, was deliberate, not because they couldn't destroy us outright, but because destruction wasn't efficient. They hadn't come to occupy. They hadn't come to punish. They had come to stabilize. That word stabilize frightened me more than anything else in her report, because stabilization is something you do before expanding. That was the quiet truth under every human action at Sol. They weren't here for conquest. They were here to clean their local environment before turning their attention elsewhere, and we never even saw where elsewhere was. I think about that sometimes, about the scale of a civilization that could treat the fall of the Council as a maintenance task. I think about the fleets they didn't send, the resources they didn't use, the technology they didn't reveal. And I think about the fact that while we were bleeding to hold a line they'd already written off, they were already looking past it. The Council failed because we misunderstood the enemy. We thought they were a danger because of their weapons. We thought they were a danger because of their ships. But the truth is, those are just tools. The danger is their preparation. The danger is that they plan decades in advance, that they are willing to let you underestimate them for as long as it takes, and that when they finally move, they don't just take the field. They own it before you realize the game has started. There's a memorial now for the fleets that fought at Seoul, for the worlds that once belonged to the Council. I've been asked to speak there. I haven't decided if I will. What would I say? That they died fighting a war that wasn't really a war? That the galaxy they fought to defend is gone, and the new one doesn't even remember their names? Sometimes I wonder if it matters, because out there, beyond the edges of the space we used to map, past the limits of our old charts, the humans are already moving. They aren't talking about us anymore. Their fleets are redeploying. Their resources are shifting. Their transmissions are full of new terms. Territories we've never heard of, objectives we can't identify, exploratory designations that don't appear on any Council record. Whatever they were preparing for at Seoul, it wasn't us. We were just the warm-up. And that's the thought I carry with me. The thought I wish every new government, every independent world, every former Council system would take seriously. Humanity's attention is a force. When it's on you, you will feel it. But when it moves past you, when it turns towards something else, that's when you realize you were never the center. You were just in the way. That's what I'd say if I speak at the memorial. The Council wasn't defeated, it wasn't conquered, it was checked off the list. And somewhere beyond our old borders, humanity is already working on whatever comes next. If this story sent a chill down your spine, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button and stay with us here on Stellar HFY. Now we want to hear from you. If the Sol campaign was just a minor theater, what do you think humanity's primary objectives really are? Drop your theory in the comments. We read every single one. See you in the next story.